Etwas syncretic non-anti-Zizekism. Try to give a little more freedom to the thinking, which is to say not merely to say Žižek is either incorrect or trivial, but to leave it a little bit free-floating. Okay, so the article under question that we're going to juggle is the Vintko Globokar article, which sort of brings in the composer at the beginning and then at the end of the article, but I'm not going to focus on the thesis of the article per se, but only use the article more for looking at some of Žižek's undying points, which he always comes back to as the archaei, or principles of his Dasein. Yeah, we could leave it open house to how far Žižek is really authentic here, or even that there's a veracitude in Žižek rather than that there's a Žižek brand and then Žižek himself. I guess I guess it doesn't matter in a way, because it seems like his personality has to come into his choices of themes. So if you're a thinker, you have to kind of choose what your problems are and choose your themes, and in doing so, necessarily you're colored by what you're receptive to and what you're not receptive to. So Žižek is very receptive to certain themes which he calls materialist themes. So this is what I want to attack from the point of view of thinking of personality, which is, I think, in keeping with the Protagorean thinking, which I understand not to be a relativism only in the sense that there's one being to which the enviable knowledge, as Aristotle calls it, and also it's almost like it's a knowledge only for us. It wouldn't make sense for any other being. A knowledge of politics, for instance, Aristotle says in the Metaphysics, would still, it has something that's not truly the absolute philosophic knowledge, or which in a transformed way is in Hegel as the world mind, as it were, which is supposed to be something that reminds in a different way of the Socratic remembrance. But it's not done in the way Socrates does it, but it's supposed to have come through the process of history for Hegel, this opening of the world mind, although we're supposed to understand it was always already there to be disclosed, or to be, I guess in Hegel's language, to be immediately available, just like he says at the beginning of the phenomenology, immediacy. So only in so the way I understand it and Strauss understands it, I think any other way is either some kind of incorrect use of Hegel, which is in a way, despite the word, perfectly legitimate, as long as it's admitted that it's not the Hegel of Hegel, that it's some other Hegel, contemporary Hegel. Maybe we And then always with this paradox that I think it was Croce that made the remark that all history is contemporary, because just for this same type of reason, because we have to set certain questions, we're looking at certain things that we're responsive to, people that lived in times when, for example, the difference between winter and summer were much more dramatic than they are when you have Saudis in the desert with outdoor air conditioning, or just heating and so on. Remembering that if you were a king in the 16th century, you would have put on a heavy coat when you went inside the castle, because it would be drafty, right? Even though you're burning down a whole forest on, 50 fireplaces in the castle, it's still, you put on a heavier coat when you come inside than when you're outside. So things like that change our attitude, but that's just one example of what it means, what Croce had in mind when he says we're always contemporary, all history is contemporary history. It's through the pattern in the kaleidoscope of our Dasein. But I want to add that I think more basic than this, perhaps, it vies for basicness, is personality. So the whole I would say I just give examples to start with, because Kant says, and it seems still to be a good little bit of orientation. Kant says precepts or perceptions without conceptualization are blind. There's something kind of in the tradition which I think thinks of the animal as having perceptions but not conceptualizing things specifically. So the animal may be very crafty in its actions, like the wolf that when it's being tracked by the hounds dips its paws in the stream. It knows this the same way. Steinbeck gives this example the same way that he gives the example of the fox. I think the fox doing that, and then saying it's like the way bees, which don't know to remember that the winter's coming, go about making their hive. That's one kind of phenomenological way to kind of express through simply examples what the blindness of the precepts means. It doesn't mean totally lack of Bewusstsein or consciousness, but it means not having this concept such that you could then, in a generalized way, it's later, we have layers upon layers of strata here. So originally with Strauss would have corrected me, I realized, because if we were studying Plato and we're talking about the eidos, and we're talking about the move from theoi to eidos, then we can't say concepts in the way, since Kant is in this sense the philosopher of Überhaupt. He brings in this sense that ideas are just generalizations, and then later Max Weber's formula, which is now in control of the university, of the idealized types. Especially, that's how anybody working in the sciences would understand idealized types as the thing to work with, not ideas, and not ideal types, I guess. Not some discussion about what Plato understands by ideas, but let's just say concepts. Let's think about it in terms of generalization, because that's how Kant was thinking about it in his saying the precepts are blind without the concepts, but the concepts are empty without the precepts. So concepts take the place of speculative knowledge in the Catholic system. For instance, we could apply it also to Hillel's famous saying, which either happens because some ignorant Jew, as most Jews are, comes and says, "Oh, Rabbi, tell me the essence of Judaism," or in the alternative version, because some new convert. I think the alternative version I kind of feel is like some kind of fig leaf. Supposedly a new convert has asked Hillel to explain the whole of Judaism, and then he gives a negative form of the so-called golden principle, or golden rule, that says don't burn down houses, don't kill your brother, don't seduce a married woman, and so on. And then I don't know, like 100 years passed, or a little longer, and another rabbi comes around and Akiva and says the reverse. He says, well, he realizes this formula wasn't sufficient, so he turns it around and says, but you must do good to others. You must do the good things to others. And then, oh God, 1,000 years pass or more, and then we get the next really authoritative phrase by looking at, I think in Leviticus, maybe Leviticus 19:18. That might be wrong, but from Maimonides tells us, let's look at some text about that, and something about the famous stuff about treating people as a neighbor. And then there's this little tweak where they say, but actually the neighbor is slightly different from yourself, or your own most, of your nearest and dearest, and then they prove it textually and so on. But anyway, so we have this long type of discussion, which I think in Judaism, this is kind of, beside from being law, or beside from being part of the Torah, or the Mishnah Torah, it's also part of the Yizkor, it's part of the memory of the people. So, but then if you look at this from the point of view of Catholicism, you'd have to say, these are questions about a speculative principle, which they give as do good and avoid evil. So that's supposed to be the highest way of stating that kind of speculative principle, which also goes as the golden rule. But we could see, unless we have some example from our life of something we call good, something we call evil, something we call doing, something we call avoiding, this would be totally empty. It needs to be a congeries of precepts and constants need to fill this out. So we can see the fact that Žižek in his person is posing himself questions, and he's chosen the questions, and he's responsive to certain things. It moves in this precept concept way of thematizing and directing oneself. So okay, taken in that spirit, let's think about the first thing. He's always going over this again and again, 50 years, maybe longer. He's been going over this type of thing, like this Bertolt Brecht example. So I would say, first of all, what I wanted to give these examples of the more the Žižek type of people, like Brecht himself, or Lacan or Freud. Maybe not Freud so much. I think Jung is right. Freud's a mixed case. It's more complicated. So is Marx, I think. But not so. I'm not talking now about their output or what they wrote, but I'm talking about their personality, in terms of their personality. On the other side, you would have somebody like Dostoevsky or Dugin, for instance. Not because they're both Russian, although Russians do tend to be stronger on this characteristic, I think, or maybe even Slavs, maybe more Eastern Slavs, I think, not Slavs in general, are stronger on it. But what does it amount to? So let me give a little sort of example as an analogy. Supposing the case in what Žižek is strong in, obviously, is he's he can stand up for himself in normal conditions, right? He can handle his personal affairs. He can he's strong and courageous in social things, I think, but in the social world, but not in his geistische body, let's say, not in this, to use this phrase that he's using in the, or he's evoking in the article, which apparently comes from Schelling, is very unconfident inwardly. This is my main thesis of why he's thematized materialism in the way he has. So think of somebody that has an accident, their wife's killed, their leg is chopped off, their career's ruined, they have no money to buy a good replacement leg. They're looking around all the time, expectantly hoping to find a benefactor. So Zizek's absolutely not like that with respect to outward things. This is what I'm trying to say. But there's a the whole point of this is there's a corresponding trait, which you see in Dugin, which you see in myself, which you see in Dostoevsky, which you see, I would say, also in Marx, although that shows the difference. We're not talking about the direction of the teaching, which is supposedly materialist in Marx, but we're talking about the strength, the inward strength. It's this whole, so keep that metaphor. So now think of Zizek's mentality like this. Well, the way Zizek thinks about belief or religion, so say in this Brecht thing that he mentions, is what he thinks is, it's as though we were inwardly groping for something pathetically, like this person looking for a benefactor. That's his whole image, because that's the way he is. But that's not the way anybody who's metaphysically mature is. So it's just an impossible starting place. All the real discussion on the subject has to do with people that are confident in their movement with respect to these this situation. So, for instance, Thomas Aquinas did it bother him that he made an inquiry as to whether God existed or not? Was he squeamish about it? Was it because, maybe my benefactor won't exist or not? He approaches all these issues very confidently, and it's not at all the kind of matter that has colored all of Zizek's thinking. So let's look more at the example of the Brecht saying. So the Brecht is saying, if God exists, would it change your actions? And then he adds, if you answer yes, then you already believe. You're attesting to the fact that you believe. But then we're given only this concept, and we're blind with it because we don't really know what they're referring to other than that discussion, which could be discussion between airheads. We don't know what they're talking about. But now as soon as we populate it with something, so think of Socrates in the Apology, where Socrates says, if I saw somebody who was wiser than me and who handled his affairs better than I did, I would imitate him. So this is the whole thinking of the tradition is knowledge consists of, you see somebody doing something right, like making a saddle, let's say. And if you're just doing it, or actually, let's say the example Aristotle gives is boxing. So like people could have a fight and then, but not have any boxing technique as Odysseus did when he boxed those suitors, which had been troubling his long forsaken dwelling for all those years that he was away on his journeys and at the Trojan War. I mean, Odysseus being kind of a gentleman, as it were. What is that term? We just looked at it. Kalon, or Kalos, something or another. There's a term that is sort of like a noble. It says, here's Odysseus. He has this skill, this gentlemanly skill of boxing, and you look at it and it draws favor to it. You think this is something that he knows how to do and it's being done properly. This is all this thinking in Aristotle and Plato always have this kind of sense of this is what knowledge is. And if you're just in a fight randomly, you could still box. But if you had that skill, then you would have the knowledge. And then this question, is it teachable? So taking knowledge like this, what sense does this you already believe mean? We have so many examples of things where we look and we say, yes, we could improve that. And not only on things of some future nature, but if we're walking around in a rubbish heap and then we say, wouldn't it be better if this were cleaned up and if there was a nice building here? It's obvious. So the one state is defective, the other is complete. Does somebody have the knowledge to go from 1 to 2? This is so. I mean, this is why I call that belief. So I think Brecht's question is just wrong, because if you say, if there is a God, would it make a difference? And then you say yes, but it's already implied. It's so because we've seen things improved upon, we've seen things that are better than they are, so it means agathon exists. It's obvious. So it doesn't make any sense to pose it as a matter of belief in that sense. I think it only appears as a matter of belief once, through wrong thinking about it, we question whether there's any state higher than the one that's currently available, and then you could come to something like in Hegel, where you have this very low view of what relatively very low view of what ultimate knowledge amounts to, just sort of something like that people have no obligations, they only have rights, such as the right to unlimited property right, instead of a property right where the king says you can manage this place and have possession of it, but you can't sell it. You can't buy and sell it. Or in other cases, I think in China there's cases like or Japan actually, and where you could manage the estate, but you didn't have the usufruct. You couldn't get the personal benefit off the possession of it. You had possession, but you didn't have usufruct, and you didn't have the right to alienation. So there's all kinds of different ways one can understand property, but when this notion that there's no obligations but only rights comes in, a totalized property right shows up on the scene as part of that. somehow Hegel admits that. He admits totalized property. But I'm just saying, this is the kind of detail that has to be involved in the knowledge that is the knowledge of the end of history for Hegel. It has to be some kind of arche or principle or concept of this kind. I guess it's called a begriff of this kind, and it has to correspond to the world mind or to the absolute mind. Now, I suppose you could say once you have these kind of principles, you could then, so we could compare that with realize that the liberal system is absolutely comparable to the Catholic system. The Catholics have opinions about all these matters, about property rights, about, of course, famously about usury. And then the liberal system has different opinions about it, and the bourgeois push through the liberal system because, yeah, Luther opened the door, but it wasn't really him who was behind Protestantism. It was the power of the burgherdom, or whatever you want to call it, the middle class, early 16th century middle class, because they wanted these freedoms, and they could use them because they were middle class and no longer peasants, no longer feudal. It's like in the halfway house between, I don't know, I guess once the middle class gets strong enough, then you call them bourgeois or bourgeoisie, and then they decide, oh, we'll do this Aufhebung or emancipation of the peasants, so they no longer have to be in the feudal system, and proletarianize them, make them into our workers. So then we could live off the money, off some investments, and have other people do things for us, but we'll tell them that they've been emancipated. So that's the kind of thing that we could then say, wait a second, but is there an improvement available here? As soon as we say, yes, there could be an improvement, this is what they're calling believing in God. I don't see any way out of that. That's really what they're saying. So I think Žižek is confused. He's confused in his ideas because he's so devoted to being a materialist, but it doesn't work with all these other Brecht's notion of materialism, all these other notions. He doesn't think he doesn't think thoroughly enough here. And so this, I believe, also, I'll just bookend this by saying this also goes over to, his problems with understanding Dostoevsky and whether or not this saying was said exactly, but it is said in near form a number of times about everything is permitted. What is so I just give one more attempt to state that issue more succinctly, which is that Ivan Karamazov could have gone, I don't know how to pronounce the name of the place, Cheremishia, which would have signaled to Smerdyakov, look, I'm concerned with what's happening, I'm staying close by. Or he could have gone to Moscow, which in my interpretation would have meant no sorga, no concern. He's broken out of there's no complicity anymore because he's just not related to the situation anymore. That's what nihilism would be. And then everything is permitted means he doesn't have to be guilty, or he doesn't have to do the Walter Benjamin thing, I rather prefer remembrance, but instead he could go to Moscow, he could go to the moon, he could get on the Elon Musk, buy some speculative stock in the Martian terraforming or whatever, and he could do anything. But he's broken out of this, like Heidegger says in this, any authentic action, Eigenlichkeit action, makes us culpable, makes us the Schuld. It brings us into guilt. Okay,